Now look at verse number 4. The Bible says this: there were giants in the earth in those days and also after that. So the Bible's saying that there was giants in those days. What days? The days that we're talking about, okay, when people are beginning to multiply. And then it's also saying after that. When's after that? Well, after the flood, there was still giants in the Bible, okay? We have recorded stories of many different giants. David and Goliath, okay? That's a very clear story of a giant. So the Bible's making it clear that there's giants in those days and also after that. And it says, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. So it's saying specifically, that these giants are in the earth when? When the sons of God are coming into the daughters of men. And it says, and they bear children to them. Now, there's a couple ways to look at this. And I believe what it's clearly saying is that the sons of God are literally producing these giant children, okay? It's a result of these relationships that they're having with the daughters of men. Another way you could look at this is that it's just denoting the time. It's just saying the time that the men are doing this is the same timeline that we have the giants. But it would kind of seem weird why it would be worded that way. And it's also, since it says, and they bear children to them, that to me gives the connotation or goes back to the idea that there was giants in the earth in those days. Now, when it says the same, okay, became mighty men which were of old, men of renown, that is clearly talking about the sons of God. That's not talking about the giants. Obviously, when you have a litany of pronouns in a passage, it can become a little bit confusing about who he's talking about. But it says very clearly that, and they bear children. Who's the they there? The daughters, the wives, okay? Bear children to them. Who's the them? The sons of God, okay? The same, meaning the same context that we were talking about, which would be what? The men, okay, became mighty men which were of old. Now that can only be one group. Why? Because there's only one group that's super old. Who is the super old group? The genealogy that we read of, the sons of God, the guys that are living to be 900 years old, okay? Now I remember going to a church and this one pastor, he told the congregation, he was saying that God hates giants. And I was like, what in the world? And he basically taught this weird Nephilim doctrine, okay, that these like giants are a result of these hybrid angels and women mating or something. And since they're like not really human, God just automatically hates them or something like that. And it's like such a weird doctrine. But the reality is, like, obviously, most of the giants in the Bible, God has nothing to deal with. God's not, using them in a great way. But there are people that are big that God uses. I mean, Saul was head and shoulders above all the Israelites, and he was greatly used by God at one point in time. And to say that these are weird hybrids really is kind of a strange abstraction from reality, because people we see today are not that much smaller than the giants described in the Bible. Go, if you would, to Deuteronomy chapter number 3. Go to Deuteronomy chapter number 3. Let me show you a few examples of this. Deuteronomy chapter number 3. But afterward, there are going to be other giants, and they were still normal men. Okay, obviously they were abnormal in the sense they're bigger. They're abnormal in the case that some of them have 6 fingers. But outside of that, they still have flesh, they still have a soul, they still have a spirit, they still have the same desires as a normal man. They're just bigger, okay? In Deuteronomy chapter number 3, look at verse number 11. For only Og king of Bashan remained of the remnant of giants. Behold, his bedstead was a bedstead of iron. Is it not in Rabbath of the children of Ammon? 9 cubits was the length thereof, and 4 cubits the breadth of it, after the cubit of a man. So the Bible actually gives us a picture of how big this guy's bed was. 9 by 4. Okay, now a cubit, we don't have an exact measurement for a cubit in the Bible. It doesn't say in in inches or whatever, because they're not on that system, okay? They're also not on the metric system. But generally speaking, a cubit is just from the tip of your finger to your elbow, okay? And generally throughout history, this has been regarded as 18 inches. 18 inches. A span, which is mentioned in another place, go if you would to 1 Samuel chapter 17, a span would be 9 inches approximately. A span is basically from the tip of your pinky all the way to the tip of your thumb. For a normal man, It's approximately 9 inches, which would make sense that it's 9 and 18 as measuring tool devices. We use things like a foot or, a half a foot or these type of measuring devices. But essentially, if you take these numbers and you multiply them by 18 and then divide by 12, you'll come up with the fact that his bed was approximately, well, I had another conversion here. But I mean, this would be like 162 inches, okay? And what I also thought about is this. I have a king-size bed, okay? And my king-size bed is like 80 inches by 76 inches. And I'm about 70 inches, okay? So I looked at this conversion rate. That's about 87.5% of the bed's length is my height, okay? So if we use the same conversion, right, on him, for the 162 inches, that would mean he was about 141 inches in height, assuming things are similar, okay, 0.75. And that would make him 11.81 feet tall. Now that's really tall, okay? This guy is quite possibly the largest guy mentioned in the Bible, but we don't know. Maybe he just really liked to stretch out in his bed. He could have been a lot shorter, okay? I can understand why you want to stretch out on your bed. I like to stretch out. But I'm just saying, if my bed proportion to me is similar to his, then he would have been about 11 feet. Now, we have somebody where the Bible actually gives us a very specific height for him. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse number 4. It is David and Goliath. And Goliath is mentioned very specifically. It says in verse number 4, "And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span." Now again, if you take the same tactics that I just showed you of measuring, you'd basically times it by 18, and then you would also add the 9 for this. So you'd have 108 inches for here, and you'd have 9 for here. So you'd have about 117 inches in height, which would equate to 9.75 feet tall. Now that's really tall. Okay, so that guy's for sure almost 10 feet tall. This guy could have been more or less the same height, maybe bigger. But, in today's world, I looked up the tallest person in modern history, according to regular history, a guy named Robert Wadlow. He was 8 feet and 11 inches tall. Very recently, okay? People in the NBA, Yao Ming, he's 7'6". That's not that far. I mean, 11 inches, I mean, he's basically less than a foot away from Goliath in height. Now, I'd say this. I don't think, though, that the people that are this tall today are very similar to the giants in the Bible, because people that are this tall are so awkward physically, they wouldn't really be that much of a threat on the battlefield. I mean, these people have a hard time standing. It's usually because they have some kind of a disease that's causing their body to stretch to abnormal proportions. I believe that Goliath not only was 9, plus feet tall, but he's also an athletic 9 feet tall. That this guy was just a giant monster that you did not want to oppose. He could very easily, use his body in a way that a normal person could use their body. It wasn't like as much of an abnormality as is today. But some people will go so as far as to say, well, the giants in the Bible, they're these weird hybrids, and then they justify it by looking up things in the book of Enoch. Well, the book of Enoch does describe this weird story of these hybrid angels mating with women or whatever, which is false doctrine. It's wicked. It's blasphemy. But to justify their position, in the book of Enoch, it says that it bare children that were 450 feet tall, babies. Because it says there were 300 cubits, which you multiply by the 18. A woman giving birth to a 450-foot tall baby. Okay? And I can't even draw it to scale or whatever, but it would be like, this is like a 450-foot tall building, and this is like a woman in comparison to scale. That's what the book of Enoch is wanting you to believe. Okay? That's stupid. Okay, that's foolishness. It's nonsense. It's not reality. But to say that a person got this big, that's not that big of a stretch. Okay, that's something that could be understood. That's something that falls within a modern understanding even of height and that type of information.